When the S8 Plus was released last year, it sat unparalleled in design for most of the year. 12 months though can bring out the best in the competition, and the S9 enters a competitive flagship world filled with high-end specs and just notches everywhere. Can the S9 and the S9 Plus keep Samsung on top? And most importantly, is it worth the premium price? I'm John Rettinger from Techno Buffalo, and this is our review of the Galaxy S9 and S9 Plus. For full disclosure, most of this review is going to focus on the S9 Plus, which I used for almost 2.5 weeks before filming. It was super important for me to get to know the phone before rushing out a review. I really liked the S8, but there were two major problems with it. No stereo speakers and the maddeningly placed fingerprint reader. Samsung clearly listened to consumers and fixed both of these, making the earpiece work double duty as a speaker and moving the fingerprint reader where it should have been all along, below the camera or cameras, depending on whether or not you've got the S9 or the S9 Plus. Speakers here are 1.4 times louder, but what matters is that they actually sound decent, and now I can actually find and use the fingerprint reader. It's starting to be less a matter of opinion and more a matter of fact that Samsung makes the best screens in the business, and for the most part, the 5.8-inch and 6.2-inch Quad HD Super AMOLED panels are unchanged from last year. The resolution is the same at 2960 by 1440, but now they get 15% brighter, making the screens way easier to see outdoors. And I get it might not sound like much, but in the real world testing, it makes a gigantic difference. Though the brightness improvements aside, the screens still look like there's a sticker on there and not real screens. Colors, as Samsung likes to do, are oversaturated a bit, but they look incredible. Black levels, as you'd expect, are killer. It's a pleasure to watch videos on, but gaming can kind of be a bit squirrely due to the super thin bezels. But I am happy to make that trade for the slim design, which is also slightly trimmed down from the S8. It was a curious decision for Samsung to essentially fork the S9 line, with the S9 Plus getting the second camera and 6GB of RAM versus 4GB on the S9. I loved that it was essentially the same phone, save for screen size, on the S8 and the S8 Plus. I don't agree with it, but no, the phones are not the same. Both phones are the first ones on the block to get the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chips. They obviously are going to benchmark well, but synthetic scores don't really matter in real-world usage. The 845's other claim to fame, aside from performance and battery improvements, is supposed to be what Qualcomm is calling Ultra HD Premium, which supports a wider color gamut such as Rec 2020. That's going to give you more colors, considerably more shades of existing colors, in 10-bit HDR, which is a mouthful. Those improvements, though, weren't really noticeable either, but maybe it's more to do with the content I was watching. What this boils down to, though, is there aren't that many improvements right now with the 845, which is kind of disappointing. But I would imagine start to see these changes in the coming months as software starts to take advantage of what I think is the awesome hardware in here. And speaking of software, it's Android 8.0 out of the box, not 8.1, which is kind of a bummer. Samsung has been a bit better at pushing the 0.1 updates than they are at pushing the full new Android versions. But if you decide to pick one of these up, resign yourself to only getting Oreo and be pleasantly surprised if and when Android P ever comes. What you are going to get though with the S9 and S9 Plus is the latest version of Samsung Experience. It's quick, and thus far I've had no slowdowns at all. I get that it's a preference thing, but at least be open-minded going in. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. So while good, it's not perfect though. There's still duplicate apps what Google offers, which is kind of annoying. I'm looking at internet browser nobody uses. I also don't like having a separate Galaxy App Store. I've covered Samsung's UI at length, so I won't go too much into it here. Bixby is also here, same with its non-reprogrammable button. They added some new tricks like calorie counting, some AR makeup stuff, and the ability to translate words, which if you look in the corner, it's just gonna say it's using Google Translate. It is pretty solid though for performing like phone tasks, but as an assistant, it's slow to respond and doesn't always answer the questions right all the time. So Samsung is getting into the live emoji game with AR emojis. Think of them like HD versions of the Nintendo Mii. And it's super easy to just view these as Animoji knockoffs, but in a lot of ways they do more. In just a few seconds, they're gonna create one of your face, and the facial tracking is pretty impressive, even the ability to track my face down to my individual dancing eyebrows. I like that it creates GIFs automatically for different situations. They can be used in any messaging app. It's a pretty cool implementation that feels more custom than Animoji, but in all honesty, I forgot they were there after just a few days anyway. The biggest change with the S9 and S9 Plus is with the camera. Samsung is touting dual aperture as a flagship feature, which both the S9 and S9 Plus do have. It's a big hardware change, but it doesn't really have significant impact in the real world. When comparing it to the S8, you'll notice a slightly sharper background outdoors, but that's probably also due to the 2.4 aperture. Indoors, sharpness and background look very similar. The dual camera setup on the S9 Plus just adds the optical zoom and looks and feels identical to the Note 8. It works well, and it's my preference to have the extra flexibility. The biggest change though from the S8 is in image processing. Photos look way less processed, less artificially sharp, less saturated, and just more natural. Noise reduction is also way better in low light, which I can't overstate enough. This is an incredible camera in low light. Slow-mo video on these phones is pretty awesome. In theory, 960 frames per second at 720p captures some crazy cool moments, but only records 0.2 seconds, so be sure to time it exactly right. It's a cool novelty, but it does come out a bit grainy despite the resolution. As a party trick or look what my phone can do type feature, it's pretty sweet. A crazy cool thing to mention with the cameras this time around is they actually have their own RAM to help with capturing all these images. I'm sure if you give it a few years, you'll be complaining that my camera's only got 6 gigs of RAM, but RAM is in the camera module. It's kind of cool. So the bottom line on the camera, it's not surprisingly the best camera system Samsung has ever used, but it's definitely not worlds better than the S8 or even the Note 8. So Samsung has improved the iris recognition and the facial scanning system, and this time it gives you the option to combine the two to what it's calling intelligent scan. It gives you the ease of facial unlock with security of iris, and it works pretty close to flawlessly. With light behind me in dark rooms and pretty much every other scenario I threw at it, it just worked. It wasn't always the fastest, but it was damn close to working 100% of the time. Battery sizes are unchanged from last gen at 3000 and 3500 mAh respectively, and my actual usage was slightly better than the S8 Plus. After a full day for me, I had about 35 to 40%-ish left. It looks like the 845 is about 5-10% more efficient on battery, or maybe app just got better optimized throughout the year. So I give Samsung credit, they really check almost every flagship box. IP68, expandable storage, Snapdragon 845, 6 gigs of RAM, dual camera, 64 gigs of internal storage, Samsung Pay, a freaking headphone jack, and a beautiful design without a notch. We also finally have some good colors making their way to the US in the form of coral blue and lilac purple, to go along with the now staple midnight black. I wish the gray was coming to the US, but hey, colors. So the final verdict on the S9 and the S9 Plus, they are, not surprisingly, awesome phones and the best Samsung has ever made, assuming you don't need a stylus. If you have an S8 or an S8 Plus, hold off. I don't think even Samsung believes you'll need to upgrade. But if you're coming from an S7 or older, or just coming from another manufacturer, this is a huge leap forward and gives you what I think is the best of Android. My experience was so positive with the S9 and the S9 Plus, I actually bought a Coral Blue S9 Plus for myself, which is the biggest stamp of approval I can give a device, putting my own money behind it.